St. Gabriel Kindergarten stood beside the town park, a cheerful little building with yellow walls, wide windows, and a small garden surrounded by a white wooden fence. Every morning the gate filled with tiny shoes, colorful backpacks, and children holding tightly to their parents' hands for just a moment longer before the school day began. Miss Clara always arrived early. She liked the quiet moments before the children came. She opened the blinds, placed crayons on the tables, and lined up picture books carefully along the reading shelf. On the board, she wrote the plan for the day in neat letters. Circle time, art, outside play, nap. But that Monday morning began like a thunderstorm trapped inside the classroom. The first wave of noise came with the parents. One boy refused to let go of his father's leg. Two girls argued loudly about whose jacket belonged on the yellow hook shaped like a sun. Another child dropped a lunchbox and burst into tears as if the entire world had cracked open. Miss Clara knelt beside him. "It's okay," she said gently. "Lunchboxes fall sometimes." But before she even finished comforting him, another voice shouted across the room, "Give it back." Two boys, Max and Leo, were pulling on the same red toy truck. Their hands clung stubbornly to the plastic roof. "It's mine." "No, I had it first." Across the carpet, a little girl named Eva sat crying quietly. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she rubbed her eyes with tiny fists. "I forgot Luna," she whispered. Luna was her stuffed bunny. She never came to school without it. Without Luna, Eva felt as if she had forgotten her courage at home too. Meanwhile, 3 other children were running in circles around the tables, laughing and knocking chairs slightly out of place. Miss Clara clapped softly. Friends, let's try our calm voices." But calm voices did not arrive. The red truck argument grew louder. Someone accidentally knocked over a tower of wooden blocks, and another child screamed, convinced it had been done on purpose. Miss Clara felt that familiar tight pressure behind her ribs, the feeling teachers sometimes have when 20 tiny storms are happening at once. Then suddenly, above all the noise, came a sound that didn't belong. A soft knock. Not the hurried knock of a late parent. Not the sharp knock of the principal. This one was slow and gentle. Miss Clara turned toward the classroom door. No one usually knocked here. She stepped carefully through the busy room and opened it. A woman stood in the hallway. She wore a simple pale blue cloak over a plain dress. Her dark hair rested softly over her shoulders, and her face carried a calm, warm expression, the kind you see on someone who has spent their life caring for others. "Good morning," the woman said softly. Miss Clara blinked in surprise. "Good morning, can I help you?" The woman glanced past her into the classroom, where Max and Leo still struggled over the truck, and Eva continued wiping tears from her cheeks. "I heard children here needed a little help today," the woman said gently. Miss Clara forced a tired smile. "Mornings can be busy." The woman nodded as if she understood busy in a very deep way. "May I come in?" she asked. Miss Clara hesitated only a moment. Then she stepped aside. The woman entered the classroom. And strangely, though nothing magical happened, the room began to feel quieter, almost as if the air itself had remembered how to breathe. Miss Clara didn't know the woman's name yet, but the children were already starting to notice her. The woman did not raise her voice. She did not clap loudly like teachers sometimes do, and she did not tell the children to stop or sit down. Instead, she walked slowly into the middle of the classroom, as calmly as someone entering a quiet garden. The noise softened. Not completely silent. Children are never completely silent, but the room seemed to breathe a little easier. Max and Leo were still holding the red truck between them. Their small hands gripped the plastic roof tightly, and their faces were red with frustration. The woman knelt beside them, so her eyes were level with theirs. "That truck is very important to you," she said gently. Both boys blinked in surprise. Usually adults said stop fighting, not I understand. "Yes," Max muttered. Leo frowned. "He always takes it." The woman nodded as if the problem truly mattered. "It hurts when something you want feels taken away," she said. She placed one hand lightly on the truck. Not pulling, not claiming it, just touching it softly. "Do you know what makes toys happier?" she asked. The boys looked confused. "What?" Leo asked. "Sharing them," she said quietly. "Because then no one has to feel invisible." Miss Clara watched carefully from across the room. She expected the argument to start again. But something changed. Leo's fingers loosened first. Max looked at him, then slowly nodded. "You can use it first," Max said. The woman smiled softly. 2 minutes each, she suggested. She lifted 2 fingers. I will count with you. Max accepted the rule with serious determination. Leo pushed the truck across the floor, already planning what road it would drive. Across the carpet, Eva was still crying softly. The woman walked over and sat beside her. What happened? She asked kindly. Eva sniffed and wiped her nose. I forgot Luna, she whispered. Luna? My bunny. The woman nodded gently. That must feel very lonely. Eva nodded again. The woman leaned slightly closer. What does Luna feel like when you hold her? Eva thought for a moment. Soft, she said. What else? Warm. The woman smiled. That warmth lives in your heart too. Eva looked up. In my heart. Yes. The woman said, touching her own chest lightly. When we love someone, that love stays with us, even when the thing we hold is somewhere else. Eva stared at her wrist. The woman reached into her pocket and pulled out a small pale blue ribbon. It looked simple, like something from a sewing box. She gently tied it around Eva's wrist. When you feel scared, she said softly, look at this and remember, you are not alone. Eva touched the ribbon carefully. Her tears stopped. Meanwhile, the 3 children who had been running in circles had slowed down. They were now watching the woman with curious eyes. The woman turned toward them. Can you show me your quiet feet? She asked. The children froze for a second. Then they tried. Small steps. Tiny giggles. But quieter. Miss Clara felt her shoulders relax for the first time that morning. She didn't understand exactly what was happening, but the room had changed. The storms were calming, and the children were beginning to listen. For the rest of the morning, the classroom felt different. The noise had not disappeared completely. Children were still children, but the room moved with a softer rhythm now. When someone bumped a chair, another child quietly pushed it back. When Max's turn with the red truck ended, he handed it to Leo without anyone reminding him. Miss Clara watched all of it with quiet surprise. Usually mornings like this took nearly an hour to calm down. But today, something gentle had settled over the room, like sunlight warming a cold floor. Soon it was time for art. Miss Clara placed paper and crayons on the tables. Today we're drawing our happy place, she told the class. The children leaned over their papers, tongues peeking from the corners of their mouths as they concentrated. One drew a playground. Another drew a house with a huge red roof. Someone else filled the entire page with a rainbow. Miss Clara moved between the tables, smiling and encouraging them. But she kept noticing something strange. The woman who had helped them was no longer in the classroom. Miss Clara looked toward the door. It was closed. She stepped into the hallway and glanced down both directions. No one. No footsteps. No sound of the door opening. She walked back into the classroom slowly. Miss Clara, Eva called. Eva held up her drawing proudly. Miss Clara walked over and looked at the paper. On it was a picture of the kindergarten garden. The white fence, the trees, the playground. And in the center stood a woman wearing a blue cloak. Around her, children were holding hands in a circle. Miss Clara felt a small shiver. Who is this? She asked softly. The lady, Eva said simply. The one who helped us. Max leaned over from the next table. She said toys are happier when we share. Leo nodded. And she counted for us. Miss Clara tried to keep her voice calm. Did she tell you her name? Eva shook her head. No, she said. But she said she was a mother. The room grew quiet again. Miss Clara looked once more at the drawing. The blue cloak. The peaceful face. Something about it felt strangely familiar. Later that afternoon, after the children had gone home, Miss Clara walked through the park on her way back to her apartment. The air smelled of grass and spring leaves. Near the park stood a small stone statue beside the church garden. Miss Clara slowed as she approached it. The statue was of the Virgin Mary. Carved in pale stone, she wore a flowing cloak and held her hands open in welcome. And around the statue's wrist was a small ribbon. Pale blue. Miss Clara stepped closer. Her heart beat faster. It looked exactly like the ribbon tied around Eva's wrist. Miss Clara touched it carefully. The fabric was soft and real. The wind moved gently through the trees around the church garden. Miss Clara looked up at the statue and whispered quietly, "Was it you?" No voice answered. But for a moment, standing there in the quiet garden, Miss Clara felt the same calm she had felt in the classroom earlier that morning, as if someone kind was still watching over the children. Miss Clara stood in the church garden for a long moment. The afternoon light rested softly on the statue of the Virgin Mary. Birds moved through the trees above, and the quiet park felt peaceful in a way that made her heart slow down. The pale blue ribbon fluttered gently on the statue's wrist. Miss Clara touched it again, almost carefully, as if it might disappear. It did not. She smiled softly. "Thank you," she whispered. Then she walked home. The next morning, Miss Clara arrived at the kindergarten earlier than usual. She unlocked the classroom door and stepped inside. The room was quiet again, just as it always was before the children arrived. Sunlight slowly filled the room through the wide windows. Miss Clara placed the crayons on the tables and arranged the small chairs. But this morning she added something new. On the wall near the cubbies, she taped a simple piece of paper. It said, "Be kind, share, quiet feet, help each other." Soon the first children arrived. Backpacks dropped to the floor. Shoes squeaked across the tiles. Voices began filling the room again. Max and Leo came running in together. "Miss Clara," Max said. "Look." Leo was holding the red toy truck. "We're sharing today," he said proudly. Miss Clara smiled. "That makes the truck very happy," she said. Eva came in next. She lifted her wrist. The pale blue ribbon was still there. "I remembered," she said softly. "Remembered what?" Miss Clara asked. "That I'm not alone." Miss Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. The day continued like any other kindergarten day. Blocks were built and knocked down again. Crayons rolled off tables. Someone spilled juice. Someone else laughed so hard they fell off their chair. But something had changed. When arguments began, the children tried to solve them. When someone cried, another child often walked over first. "Do you want help?" they would ask. Miss Clara noticed it again and again. Kindness spreading quietly. Weeks passed. Spring slowly turned into summer. The children sometimes talked about the lady who had visited the classroom that Monday morning. "Will she come back?" one boy asked. Miss Clara knelt beside him. "I think she comes whenever children need help," she said. "Even if we don't see her." Eva touched the ribbon on her wrist thoughtfully. "She said she was a mother," she added. Miss Clara nodded slowly. "Yes," she said. "A very good mother." That afternoon, after the children had gone home, Miss Clara walked through the park again. She passed the church garden. The statue of the Virgin Mary stood quietly among the flowers. The pale blue ribbon still moved gently in the breeze. Miss Clara looked at it and smiled. She didn't need proof anymore. Some help arrives loudly. But sometimes the greatest help comes quietly, through kindness, patience, and love that spreads from one small heart to another. And from that day forward, whenever the kindergarten became noisy or chaotic, Miss Clara would smile and say to the children, "Friends, remember to be kind." And somehow, the room always seemed to grow peaceful again.